So here's a preview of what we're going to be building. It's an expense tracker that you can use to add items to a list with their price. And over here we get a neat total. Now, these items are stored on the Firebase Firestore, and this simple UI is created with Svelte and styled with Tailwind, of course. Now, let's just go ahead and see some of the functionality real quick. So I'm going to come over here and add item called skincare, and I'm gonna set its price to $200, and I'm gonna click this button over here to add it to the list, and we get it right over here and $200. Rest assured, it's gonna reflect on the Firebase backend, but we're gonna go back to that a little bit later. Now, the inspiration for this video is actually from Code Commerce. He actually built this and this is just a spelled port because why not? So if you're into that, he built it with Next.js. You can just go ahead and check his video out. I'll leave a link in the description. So let's get right into it. So I'm going to start with a base project, and I'm here in my Visual Studio Code, and I'm going to scaffold a new Svelte and Svelte Kit project from the ground up. And to do that, I'm going to have to change directories a few times. But if you're in a directory that you already want, you're not going to have to do anything. So I'm in the root user directory in my computer, and I'm changing my directory to documents, and then within documents, I'm going to change. Or no, I'm okay. I'm gonna do it in documents. I'm gonna say npm create spelled at latest. Now this is me using pnpm. It's purely choice. I feel like pnpm is faster. This would also work if you had bun or npm as your package manager. Still be essentially the same command. Now we would like to name what's going to be the name of this project. I'm just going to call it expense tracker. I'm going to put a YT because I want to tell myself that, oh, this file was created to demonstrate a YouTube video. Got to keep my files neat and tight. All right, and go ahead and click enter, and that's going to take a while. Okay, but now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to pick skeleton project because we're going to build everything up from scratch. So go ahead and hit enter on that. And I'm like, they're asking us if we're using TypeScript. And I want this to be beginner friendly, so no, we're using JavaScript. And this is going to be a Svelte 5 view, and we're just going to use prettier for code formatting. Now, to toggle between the options here for this question, you could use the up and down arrow keys. You press the space bar to select options that you actually want, and you click enter, and everything's going to be done for you. Now, we're going to change directory into the expense tracker directory or folder that has been created for us by that command line interface that we just interacted with. So I'm going to change my directory to expense tracker YT, and I'm going to hit npm install. And it's going to go ahead and install everything. And the next thing we're going to do is open up Visual Studio Code, and within that new folder that we just created. And the command to do that is code space and then period. Click enter. And we're going to go to a new window that has just the expense tracker folder within that. Now, before we're done with our scaffolding, we're going to need one more thing, and that is just to create a, or to add Tailwind to this project. I want to add Tailwind into this project. So I'm going to go ahead and open a new terminal in this window. And to do that really quickly, it's CDR Control Shift and single question mark. It's just yeah, similar controls. You haven't played around with your VS Code too much. So I'm gonna go look for that command to add Tailwind into a Svelte project, and this is it. pm dlx Svelte add latest Tailwind CSS. Now this might be slightly different for npm. I think it should be probably npx add latest Tailwind CSS if you were using npm, but I'm using npm because I think now let's hit enter. Should get Tailwind CSS in our project. We want to use the typography plugin. Nope, thank you very much. And you can see over here immediately that this Tailwind config file gets created for us. Really, really neat. This Svelte add utility is really just automatically sets up and configures everything Tailwind config for us. Come over here. You can see that HTML, JavaScript, Svelte, and TypeScript files are already in the content that Tailwind is going to be watching. So that's very nice to know. Now that's going to be all for scaffolding. Next video, we're going to go ahead and set up a Firebase project. So next, we're going to create a Firebase project. So we're going to go ahead and head over to firebase.com. Search Firebase on Google, and I'm going to go to this Firebase console option and get this. And I actually haven't created a Firebase project yet, Gmail account, but basically you're going to want to come to this website with a browser that's already logged in to a Gmail account, a Google Gmail account, so that it's not going to be difficult. So you don't have to start signing in to a valid email account. That, but that's minor, by the way. So go ahead and get started with the Firebase project. So I'm going to call this project Svelte expense chart. Let's just see that. And okay, I'm going to go ahead and accept the Firebase terms. I confirm that I will use Firebase exclusively for purposes relating to my trade, business, craft, professional. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and new. I don't want Google Analytics for this project. So go ahead and turn off and then create the project. And it's going to take a little while. Now that that's done, we can go ahead and click on continue. We're going to go ahead and click on this web option. So Firebase knows that it's going to be a web or the web version of Firebase that it's going to make available for this particular project. And I'm going to click on web. They say that the app needs a nickname, so I'm just going to call it expense tracker. We're not going to set up Firebase hosting. We're going to register the app. Take a while. So now what they're basically telling us is they want us to install the Firebase SDK, or put simply, the Firebase package from npm, and they've given us a Firebase configuration object. This is basically how Firebase can identify every single object individually. Now, these are public keys, so there's really no need to hide them. And when I use them, I'm not going to hide them because when I need the resources for a particular sort of product in Firebase, let's say their database, I'm going to have to open my Firebase console, actually activate the database for that. But if someone wanted to maliciously go ahead and add other things like storage usage, which we're not going to use for this project, they're not going to be able to do so because they're not going to be able to access my Firebase console because only I have power to do that. So I'm going to be using these, but if you want to put them in environment variables, that's your choice, but I'm going to be using it like this, it's open for everyone. Now, we're going to go ahead and come into our um, the S code over here, and we are going to install the Firebase package. I'm going to say pm Firebase. Go ahead and run that. That's going to take a while. Now that that's done, we're going to come over into the lib folder over here, and we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call it firebase.js. And next, we're going to go over into, we're going to go over here and we're going to copy this config that was given to us. And we're going to come over here and we're going to paste it in. And then we're going to go ahead to export this application. So basically what's happening here is we're getting a function from Firebase called initialize application. And this starts up the instance of our own Firebase project. Now it passes, and how it's going to know what project to start up is via the config object. And we handily pass in that config object into this initialize app function that we're importing from Firebase. That is the return the valid instance of our application into this app variable, and we're exporting it so that we can have it throughout the entire project. Now, we're going to go into our Firebase project and make sure we create or enable the project to be able to use a Firebase or a Firestore database. And that's what the NoSQL database that Firebase has. It's called Firestore. We're gonna come in here and we're gonna say Firestore database. We're gonna click on it. It's gonna take a while. Now that that's loaded up, we can go ahead and tap on Create Database. And we're gonna pick a position, region. For me, Europe is closer to me. So I'm gonna click on Europe and next. And for our security rules, I'm going to start in production mode. I'm going to actually start test mode because we're just testing out, rather. Sorry for the problem, the error, the mix up there. But because, let's say, you're going to want to show this on a portfolio, because every developer should have a portfolio that you're trying to use to secure a job. And if you hosted this, which we will, we're going to push this app to Netlify when we're done. If you host this and someone goes ahead and accesses it 30 days after you create this project, they're not going to be able to see the project anymore because Firebase is going to take down resources for the project based on the security rules. So later during the build, we're going to change the security rules to make sure that this database is available indefinitely. But for now, we're just going to leave things the way that they are, and we're going to create a database. This is going to take a while. And we're done. We have empty new database with, so let's get started. Now, as our Firestore database has been provisioned, I'm going to leave a little note on exactly how the Firestore database is structured. First and foremost, Firebase uses the ideas of records or things that we want to store as documents, and documents are kept in collections. Now, a collection should have the same sort of documents or data types stored within them. Now, for example, let's say for our expense tracker, we want to create a collection called items. We're going to call this items collection ID field. And then we're going to say that the document IDs, as you can see, this step is to create its first document, and the document IDs are going to be automatically provisioned. Now, every item needs a name, and we're going to keep its type to be string, and we're going to give it a value. I'm going to say a microphone because I probably do need a new microphone. And then we're going to add another field. We're going to say price, and I'm going to leave this as a string, and I'm going to say $330. So now I'm going to go ahead and click save. All right, now that that's been created, you can see that we have this items collection and we have our fetch document, and it's called a microphone and it has a price of 330. Now this is the idea that is behind this Firestore database, and that's what we're going to use when we are creating our expense tracker. We're going to have a collection. It's going to be called items, and within those items we're going to store records, or you can call them documents, that have these key value pairs that we can read. So we could display this microphone and we could add all the prices on all each of the individual items to come across a total. Now, enough with the UI, showing this on the UI. Now let's get to the code and write this, and so you can add it to your portfolio. Now let's get going. Right now we can actually get to building. So first thing I'm going to do is take out these comments, and then the next thing I'm going to do, import another function from Firebase called getFirestore. Now, what this function does is return our database instance back to us. Now, what we're going to do is say want const db, which is a reference to the database, equals to getFirestore, and we're going to pass it our app, and we're going to export that out of this file so that it's available throughout our application. So what getFirestore does is it takes this app instance and it returns a database instance that's created for this app instance and returns it to this variable, and we can export that. I hope that's clear. Let's move on to actually start building this thing. Next, we're going to come into our plus page plus felt file. We're going to clear out boilerplate. Next, we're going to tag. That's where we're going to JavaScript, and we're going to markup and everything. So the uh, main object is parent. Main element is the parent element for this page, and it has styles of flex, minimum height. And most of our application, or all of our application, is going to be embedded within this main element. So I can go ahead and show you the styles. It's styled flex, meaning it should be display flex. Its minimum height is screen, which means that this main element is going to occupy the entirety of the screen. And it's flex column, which means the direction is column, and all the children elements are going to be arranged vertically rather than horizontally. And item center, we're going to center the items along the cross axes, and we're going to justify between, we are going to arrange the elements with space between them on the main axes. Now, for small screens, we have a padding of 24, and for the base screen type, we have a padding of 4. Now, some people don't usually understand this, but by default, when you put in SM or the screen sizes as your breakpoints with Tailwind, you're saying that this is the minimum width, as you can see over here. So we're saying this is the minimum width. So from the small screens upward, the padding at this size is going to be 24. That's just a quick note on the styles there. And so we have this div that has its set index to be 10, its width to be the full width of the main element, of course without the padding, and its max width is 5XL, which is 64 rem. It's also going to be, it's going to have its items centered on the cross axes and justified between. On the main axis, we want the font to be mono and its text to be small. Then we have a H1, which has a text of 4XL, which is 2.25 rem, and a line height of 2.5 rem. Padding of 4, text centered, and so this expense tracker should be really large but centered within this H1. And for the div, we're gonna have its background color as slate 800, and its padding to be 4, and it's gonna be rounded just a little bit. I'm gonna go over and close these because most of the other elements are gonna be encompassed within these. I'm just gonna go ahead and close these. So now that that's done, we're gonna go ahead and add the remaining elements. So the next thing we're gonna do is gonna be to add in this form element, and we're gonna say its display is gonna be grid. It's gonna have 6 columns. Items are gonna be centered, and the text within it is gonna be black. Now at this point, I'm gonna want to run my project so we can see just as we make changes what is going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and run the program. So pm run dev, and I'm gonna open localhost in the browser. So I'm just gonna come over here into the browser and I'm gonna minimize that also. And go to localhost 5173. Good. So that's what we have. This is our form, or this is our div with the background slate of 800, and our form is nested within that, but our form doesn't actually have any content, so it doesn't have any height. Now we're going to change that. We're going to add an input, and the application breaks because this input is supposed to be bound to a value called newItem.name, and newItem.name is supposed to be a stateful value. Now if you're not familiar with Svelte, we can create stateful values that we can use to change the DOM, or what's represented in the DOM. But rather than having to write boilerplate code of writing or making what we enter into our input elements to reflect or to change or to be equals to what is in the state value, we can just bind the value to that. And that's what exactly what we do here. We say bind the value to new item the value. So I'm gonna come over here and I'm gonna create a new state. I'm gonna call it new item. I'm gonna say it's equal to a stateful value. and I'm gonna call it an object. I'm gonna give it a name field, and I'm gonna set that name field into a string. So our new item is an object with just one property of name, but I'm gonna go ahead and I think I'm gonna add price over here also. So just so we can do that. And now we can see that our app is fine, everything is fine, and we have this impute element right all over here. So, and for the class, we just have that it spans 3 columns, it has a padding of 3 and border of 1, even though that's rarely, you can only see that when the impute is actually active. Now we're going to go ahead and add a second impute. So we're going to go ahead and add another input. And this time this input is for price. And as you knew, previously I created this stateful object. I'm just going to make this a little bit bigger so you can have more of the screen. Just gonna, you can have more of the screen. I created this stateful value called new item, which is actually an object. And for its price field, we have bound this input to the price field now. And finally, we add a button to actually add a new item to our database. But for now, it does nothing. Now we can go ahead and you can see the button rendered right over here. Now we can go ahead and create that function that actually adds items. So right now we're going to actually start writing to the firestore database. So let's go ahead and create that. We're going to come over here into the script tag over here, and we're going to create a function named add item. And to create that function, the first thing we're going to need to do actually is to import a function from Firebase called add_doc. Now go in and get that add_doc. I'm going to say that this is from Firebase /. Oops, I think got it from the wrong side of Firebase. Let me try that. Okay, that's it /firestore. A little bit of stick with that. Now we should have that. And the next thing we're going to do is create another piece of state, and we're going to call it items. Let items equals to a stateful value empty array. Now we can create our function, which we will call add items to synchronous arrow function. Now the first thing we want to do, we want to check if the new item we're about to add into the items array is going to be empty. Why we're doing this is on the front end, we keep track of actually how many items you have. It's all going to make sense in a minute, but firstly, I were to go ahead after entering some item and a price over here in the expense tracker, and I was about to add it with the add item. Just want to be sure that it's not empty, that none of these values are empty. So I'm going to come over here and say if new item dot name is not equals to empty string and new item the price is also not equals to an empty string. Then we are going to do something. And we're going to do something. Now, before we continue, I'm going to import one other function from the Firebase Firestore, and that's called collection. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to say items is equals to, we're going to spread items, and the new or the next thing in the array called items is going to be item. Now, if it doesn't make sense, let's say items already is populated with two items, which is two objects. We're saying we want the next version of items, the two previous objects that were in it, the previous item spread, then the new item that we just created passed up into the array. Now, of course, the next thing is to actually add document over into the Firestore database so that we could fetch it and the data is persisted for as long as we would like. So I'm just gonna go ahead and say add doc. Add doc is the function that we would use to add a document to a collection. So we're gonna need a database reference and a document data. Also, we're gonna have to import our database reference that we created for in our database config that's in our library folder. So I'm going to go over here and that say Firestore or Firebase, sorry. That should work. Yeah, it seems everything is fine. So we can go ahead and say EB, then collection, and we're going to say, call it a string called items. Oops, I'm actually sorry, I'm doing this a bit wrong. So the first thing we're going to pass in is collection, and we're going to pass database and then items. And then for the second argument that add doc takes, it takes in actual document data that we're actually trying to create. And I'm going to go with name, and it's going to be new item.name. And the second field on that document is going to be price and new item.price. Now, if you don't understand what's going on, just calm down and I'm going to explain the whole thing for you. So basically, what's going on here is we are saying we want to add a document to the collection in our database instance that is named items. And what we want that document to be this object which has two properties called name and price. And since what we're adding is what we just entered on the input, we could get those attributes via the new item.name and the new item.price. So let's actually test out our function and see if this works. Let's do that. We're going to come over here in this button, and we don't actually have to do this. I didn't want it to complain. That's why I did it that way. And so we can just come here and say add items. The app doesn't break, which means everything is fine. So I'm going to come over here and I am going to write, um, let me see, what am I going to write? But before I do that, how are we actually going to know that a function ran? Well, items is going to be an array that's accessible to us right here in our application. We don't actually have to go out and fetch data for it. So it would make sense if we could use that items array and map through it and create some sort of piece of UI that gets popped up to the screen immediately so that the user knows that they've been able to successfully create an item. And even though it's not successful or it's going to take a bit more time, they see it in the UI first. This idea or this strategy for creating UIs is called optimistic UI updates because essentially it's going to take some time to write the database, but we show the user the piece of UI that they have created first for writing the database. So I'm going to actually use this items array to create a list of some sort of UI before I actually try to test or run that function. Now let's go ahead and do that over right here just beneath the form. So I'm going to create an unordered list and we're going to use each member of the items array to create a list item within that unordered list. Now, so let's get to it. So we have the unordered list, we have the each block, which this is how we create or iterate over array-like items in Svelte and use it to render some piece of UI into the DOM multiple times, but with varying pieces of information. And that's our list item over there. Now we don't see anything over on the screen right here because the items array is actually empty right now. So we don't see anything outputted onto the screen. And that's why we don't see anything on the screen. So let's go ahead and try to test our function, our add item function. And let's say maybe you're not quite aware of how we use this in SvelteKit. I'm saying that I want to map through the items array and I'm going to refer to every individual item in the items array as just plain item. Now we know that each object in the items array has two properties, name and price. And so we want to display them in these two spans, name and price. And that's basically it. So let's go ahead and try our add item function. So we're going to come here and I'm going to name what I'm going to name the item is, let's say, a car. And I'm going to say it's going to cost $100,000. And I'm going to click on add. And immediately I get this car, this piece of UI. And this is actually the list item, which is displaying the item.name and the item.price. Now, to be sure that everything has worked perfectly, we're going to go over into our Firebase console and see if we have a document in the items collection that actually corresponds to what we just created. And now, yes, we do. We have car and 100,000. So everything works perfectly fine. Now I'm gonna run my app again. So I'm gonna start everything from the beginning. And what we notice here right now is that there's no list of items that we've actually added. But why? It was just there previously. But what happened was this items array is actually stored in the browser. So refresh the state, have it anymore. That's the reason why we stored our data in Firebase backend to begin with, to start with. So how do I then get all this data that's here out to the screen and use it to actually like map out items and calculate that? And obviously, I want to do this every time I fetch the data and log it out to the screen. That's what we're already adding items, fetching them. So to do that, we're gonna this code. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna come over here and we're gonna import a few more functions from the Firestore portion of the Firebase SDK. And those functions are gonna be on snapshot and query. Now I'm gonna come over here just below add items. I'm gonna say const q to query and fire, fire up the function. And we're gonna pass in what collection we want to query data from, and if need be, a query condition, like what we want to get, what specific sort of data we want to get. Now, in our case, we're not filtering through, we just want to get everything. So that just makes it a little bit easier. As I said, this is actually a very beginner-friendly course, and there's no need for you to have to implement anything that's too complicated right now. Let's go ahead and get that done. So what we're gonna do is say we want to query from a collection called items, and we want to get everything from that items collection. So we don't have to actually specify any other constraints. So we're gonna pass in this collection function that we've already gotten from Firestore. We're gonna pass in our database instance, which is telling this query function the exact database to go ahead and fetch all the data from items from. Now, the next part is a little bit hands-on, but I'm going to take it step by step. Now, we're going to say on snapshot, we want to do something. Snapshot. We're going to go ahead and fire this off, and we're going to pass it a function. So basically, what on snapshot does is it looks for query and snapshot events. So whenever this line of code runs and returns us a value, this on snapshot function, whatever function we pass into this on snapshot function as a callback function, runs again. Now the reason is because Firebase is a very front end focused, very front end focused product. So it's oftentimes very necessary that after we fetch data, we want to be able to do something with it, maybe edit loading states or something. So it's useful for us to be able to listen to when our query tasks have completed and we want to do something again with them. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to create an empty array. We're going to call it an items array. Items are, so that's kind of different from this one. And we don't, make a mistake. Actually, we're going to pass in the query that we want to listen to. In this case, it's Q. And in the next thing we're going to say is query snapshot, which is going to be referring to the result that we receive from the query Q. I'm going to call this query snap. Now, just think this over again with me. Whenever this completes, we're telling this on snapshot to listen to this particular query, which is Q. And then whatever the results of Q are, we can refer to that as the query snapshot. How does that make it? Right? Let's go and create that array. We're going to say let items ARR equals to, array. So sorry about that. Then we're gonna, oops, I actually also made another error. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove that, and I'm gonna do this. Okay, so now that makes more sense. We're listening to the query called Q, and the second argument that on snapshot takes is callback function that has access to the result on Q. So we're gonna say query snapshot dot for each because it actually returns an array. And for each function sets a callback function that ought to run for every single element in that array. And we're going to be referring to those single elements as doc. And in here, we're going to say we're going to populate the items array with the contents or the individual elements within this query snapshot array. So we're going to come in here and say items array dot push, which is function to add something into an array, and then we're going to open up an object because we want to pass an object into the items array, and we're going to spread doc data. We're going to fire up. Next thing is we're going to say ID property. We want that to be equal to doc dot ID. Now, what's going on here is when we are looping through each and every one of the elements of the query snapshot array, and we have this, and we're referring to each of them as document. These documents have specific properties like this data method and this ID property. And we're saying that for each one of the elements in this query snapshot, we want to add you, or we want to add those elements to this empty items array. And what we're adding is this doc.data method. When we call it, it returns all the values of a document or all the fields of a document as an object. So we are spreading that. So the spread syntax is basically saying if this document had a field called name and it was set to a specific value, and price and it was set to a specific value, this arbitrary object that we're passing into the items array is also going to have those properties of name and price, and with those assigned values. That's why we're spreading it. That's what the spread operator is for. And last but not least, we're just saying the ID. Since every document in Firebase has an ID, we want an ID property that is equal to the document.id for that individual document returned from the query snapshot. I hope that makes sense. And then finally, we are going to say that when that's done, we're going to say that items is equals to items array. Now, because we're saying items is equals to items array afterwards, whenever we load a page, this function is automatically going to get run off the bottom. Now, all of this is going to happen, and we're going to populate this item state. And after we populate that item state, which is we fetched from the database, we've populated the item state, we're going to be able to display all the items that we have in our database on the front end. So now let's go ahead and check it out. Ta-da! We actually do have our microphone car, which is really nice. If you hung in till now, till this very moment, please don't forget to smash that like button, smash that subscribe button, and share to anybody who you think might need this, and just support the channel. Really, comment your thoughts, ways that you think I could improve. Because, to be honest, it's not very easy to be making content, and I really do need the encouragement. Also, if you have any business that you would like to reach out to me on, I'm presently free and open to work. So just reach out to me. My mail is, or all my contact details are usually very available on the channel. So let's get right back into it. So the next thing is we want to be able to calculate our total, like how much have we spent. I know some of you, you go out and then, or you know it, you've already burned through your credit card, but we want to be able to know how much we spent. So that's the next thing we're going to do. All right, so we're going to create a function that is called calculate total, and it's going to be able to calculate the total cost of all our items. Now, if you're going to check over here, I've been trying to debug some stuff, so I actually added some more items to our database, but you don't have to worry about that yet. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a stateful value because we want to be able to update the user interface whenever the value of the total price changes. So we're going to call that state total, and we're going to just create it like so. Initialize it with a value of 0. Now, the next thing, of course, is we're going to come over here and we're actually going to create a function called calculate total. Sorry, I keep having problems with spellings. And then we're going to just equals an arrow function. And what we're going to do is we're going to say that this items array that we have over here, we want to well, first of all, we're going to say we want to create a variable called total price. Total price. And we're going to set its value to equal 0. And then we're going to say for each value or for each entry into these items array that we have, we want to do something. That's why we're using the for each method. So we're going to pass in a callback function. And in our callback function, we're going to say, and we're going to call each item in this array, we're going to refer to it as item. And I'm going to say, all right, total price plus equals, which is just adding, equals item dot price. Item dot price. And then after we're done with mapping through every value in the list, we will say that the total state that we created above should be equals to the new total price that we've calculated. And of course, we're going to need some UI to actually display that. So we're going to do that over here just beneath the unordered list. And we're just going to come in over here. And what I'm saying is basically if the item state has a length less than 1, which ultimately means it's empty, I don't want to display anything. And if it's not empty, then we should display a div with a span and the another span that actually contains the total that is calculated in a div, and this should be flexed side by side. So the flex and justify between, which means there's space between them, and some pattern at the side, and we want the text to be white. All right. So now let's open up our application and see if everything works fine. Uh, we have $0. Why is that? Let's go ahead and refresh and see if we get that right. Oh, I think I know the problem. We did not actually fire the calculate total function. We never fired it. We just defined it over here. So we're going to come over here down beneath and we're going to fire calculate total. And we should come back and yeah, we have the total. So and we have the total down below. And so the last thing we're going to do is create a function to delete items. Right now, if we click on this X button over here, which is supposed to delete an item, actually don't get anything done. That's because we actually haven't created a function that fires when this button is clicked. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and import two extra functions from this, which are the document function and delete document or doc and delete. So I've gotten over and imported both of those over here. The import statement, make this a lot bigger. So I've gone ahead and imported doc and delete doc. And the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and create the delete item function. So basically what's going on here is I'm saying that the delete item is an asynchronous arrow function that takes an ID as a parameter, and we fire this delete doc function synchronously because it returns a promise. And the delete doc function takes in itself a path to a document that it's supposed to delete. And so this doc function that also comes from Firebase essentially does that. It returns a path to document. So first of all, we pass in our database instance, which is DB over here, and items, which is our collection, and the ID of the specific document. So it's going to match any document that has this ID, and it's going to pass it over to delete doc, and delete doc is going to delete it, but it's going to take some time. So that's why we have this wait over here. So now that we've created that function, go ahead and go to that button and specify it in its onClick event handler. And that's what I've done right over here. Unclick, and we pass in this anonymous function so that we can pass in the parameter. Now I'm just going to go ahead and add one more item called skincare, and I'm going to make it $200 as usual. I'm going to add that, and then I'm just going to delete it. If you're being observant, you should realize that we didn't touch the items array that we're using to map out this list of items over here. We did not touch that. So why did it automatically delete skincare from the items array? Well, that's because of the onSnapshot over here. Because onSnapshot not only listens to our query, but it listens to every addition on the collection called items. So anytime we change anything, the collection in the items collection, this piece of code is going to rerun. This entire body of code is going to rerun. So when we actually deleted that skincare, this on snapshot callback fired, and it started this whole body all over again and recalculated the total. And we can go ahead and try to check it out in our database. Just gonna have to change browser instances just in case you're being a little bit skeptical. I'm gonna do it again. So we have this over here at the bottom, and we have car, and I'm gonna widen this just a little bit. So we have the car and the watch. Now I'm gonna add skincare again, just so we can see the delete function in action. I'm gonna come here and refresh this, and now we can see that we have a third item called skincare. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that. And over here, it's also gone. So it works automatically. The reason why our list gets auto-updated is because on Snapshot is actually listening to our collection. Well, that's going to be it for today's video. If you liked it, leave a link, uh, subscribe, and like the video and share it to anyone who you think, is going to need it. But we've actually fallen short of the CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete, because we actually don't have any functionality to update any of the items. I'm going to leave that up to you. So you can use what you learned to update or extend the functionality of this application so that you can be able to update items. And I'm going to leave a link to the Firebase Firestore documentation so you can implement that. Have a nice day.